Welcome to the ChangeMakers podcast, produced by City Current and powered by Higginbotham. I'm your host, Jeremy Park, and on this episode, we're shining a light on depression and suicide, a very important conversation with Tom and Ellen Harris, co-founders of the Jordan Elizabeth Harris Foundation. Let's start out. Tom and Ellen, how are you doing?
Well, we're doing great right now, Jeremy. Actually, we are in the beautiful state of Maine, where we spend a lot of time in the summer, and it's quite a bit cooler here than it is where we live in Texas.
I was about to say, I'm sure it's a lot cooler between Memphis and Texas. You're a lot cooler there than you are here in 100 degrees.
So we're very happy right now.
We're blessed people, for sure.
The fun of the ChangeMakers podcast is we get to dive into your personal story. We'll talk all about the good work you're doing with the foundation, but let's get to know you personally. So I'll leave it to either one of you, but let's start with a little bit of just your childhood and where you grew up.
Okay, well, I guess I'll start. I grew up in a little town called Swampscott, Massachusetts. Swampscott's on the North Shore of Boston. At the time I was growing up there, I think maybe there were 20,000 people in the town, maybe. Pretty idyllic little on the shore town. I went to college at the University of Massachusetts, and I don't know if you can see my husband's t-shirt. He played football there, and that's where we met each other. I played a lot of sports in high school and left sports when I got to college, but we met each other at a fraternity one night and got married 4 or 5 years later, I guess.
I did.
Yeah.
Nice. Tom, what about you? Talk about your childhood.
So I'll give you the cliff notes. So grew up in this very small town in Baldwinsville, New York, upstate, a little bit north of Syracuse. My dad was a World War II veteran. Neither my mom or dad went to college. They found a way to get all 4 of us through Catholic schools in and around the city of Syracuse. Like Ellen said, I had the opportunity to go to University of Massachusetts and play football there on a scholarship. Lucky enough to meet Ellen, and we got married, lived in Boston for a couple of years. And I was working for an organization that was owned by American Airlines, got transferred to Arlington, Texas, which is what brought us to Texas. Thought I'd be there, or we'd be there 2 years, and 40 plus years later, we still live in Texas. So very blessed, very fortunate to be able to be doing what we're doing today, not only for the company that I work for, but with the foundation that we've created.
Absolutely. We were just recently in Boston, amazing city. When you look at the character and the people and ease of access, I was blown away, and obviously Fenway and the sports history. So for each of you, what's one favorite memory of Boston?
The first concert that I ever went to was at Boston Garden, and it was the Rolling Stones, and the backup group for the Rolling Stones was Stevie Wonder.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, so that was a lot of years ago, but that was a very, very fond memory for me, for sure. That was the original Boston Garden before they turned it into something else with the parquet floors and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tom, what about you?
2 real quick ones. I was at the Boston Red Sox, New York Yankees playoff game in 1977 when Bucky Dent hit his home run to win the game and allow them to go to the World Series. Probably one of the few Yankee fans in Fenway when that happened. So luckily I was with my football buddies and they protected me. I'd say the other one was the awful winter storm, the nor'easter in 1978. We lived on the beach, we being myself and 4 of my buddies from UMass. And for 4 days, we were hunkered down there. And on the 5th day, my lovely bride, who was then my girlfriend, walked from Swampscott to Revere Beach on a beautiful blue sky day through probably a foot and a half of water. And and was nice enough to come visit me after that awful storm that we dealt with. So
everybody had been cooped up for so long. It snowed nonstop for 4 days. And when it stopped, they had declared a snow emergency. So there were no cars on the road. It was an incredibly beautiful day. Everything was covered in white and everybody wanted to get out. And so people were just outside walking and pulling their kids on sleds. And I started walking and I just kept walking. And how many miles was that? Probably
about 12.
Wow.
I think it was so much.
Well, anyway,
it's a long ways.
it was a long walk.
Long walk. It wasn't around the block.
You mentioned Yankees and Red Sox. Is there a sports rivalry in the family at all?
Well, Ellen's probably a Red Sox fan, but not a big one. But my dad was huge Yankee fan, and I grew up a Yankee fan. So
there you go. Well, let's talk about moving to Texas, and Tom, on your end, working for Hillwood, and really amazing storyline in terms of Alliance Airport, your background in the industry. Give us a little bit on the business side, and then we'll switch over and talk about family and the foundation.
So I took somewhat of a circuitous route to the organization that I work for now. After having worked for American for many years, I worked here in Arlington for them, and then down in Austin, Texas, at the old Robert Miller Airport, which was a downtown airport that's no longer even there. I had the opportunity to go to work for the Department of Aviation for the city of Austin, working at that airport. And the gentleman that I worked for there was recruited by Ross Jr. Thank you. Ross Perot Jr., forgive me. To run Alliance Airport in Fort Worth when it opened in December of 1989. And I was hired in April of 90 to go to work for the aviation companies at Alliance to manage the day-to-day operations of the airport, but also be the service provider. And for the most part, that means that we were the aircraft fuelers there, and have been ever since, working for the city of Fort Worth on their behalf, basically still managing and running the airport and providing those services. When I showed up in April of 1990 with Alan, a golden retriever, and our 18-month-old daughter, Jordan, I stood on the ramp, aircraft parking ramp, and looked as far as I could see, 360 degrees, and there was no vertical development. There was a runway, a taxiway, a 10 by 20 foot trailer that was the air traffic control tower, 10 by 40 foot trailer that had a couple of fire department guys in it, and a bunch of Cessna 152s doing touch and go landings. So that was April of 90. So now we're in 2022. We've been very, very fortunate to be able to do the things we've done, but essentially we are helping the city of Fort Worth and some of the other surrounding cities build out their cities. There's 65,000 people who go to work there every day. There's 550 companies there. Huge economic development driver for the community. Just very, very lucky to be a part of that.
When you look at the changing dynamics, really around the economic development, airports, the vital role, logistics, all of those pieces, what's something, and you mentioned obviously looking around 360 at that period versus where you are today, what's something that really has put a smile on your face when you look at the impact, managing through all the transitions and where we are in this moment, but what it means looking forward?
Well, I was one of the early hires, and I would tell you we work for a tremendous organization and a tremendous family who from day one had a great vision of what Alliance might be someday. And I would tell you that being a part of the team, that the leadership team that has been able to do what we've done, there's something very special about looking out your window of your office and knowing that you had a lot to do with that success. And basically, when you think about our project, it's a huge 28,000 acre development project that ranges from the north side of 820 all the way up to the city of Denton along the 35W corridor. So we're 30 plus years into it, and we still have a long way to go. So we're very excited.
Talk about your approach to building relationships. When you talk about, especially projects of that magnitude, where you're not looking at just the next year, you're looking 5-10 years down the road, everything you're talking about, and you have to have multiple stakeholders coming together to play their role. So it's a lot of relationship building. It's a lot of vision casting. It's a lot of managing expectations. What's your approach to being able to be successful with all these moving entities?
So great question. And I will tell you that if you look at our logo, it's a triangle logo. And the corners of each of that logo represent the three partners that came together that made Alliance happen. And that's the city of Fort Worth, the FAA, and Hillwood. And the very first large piece of infrastructure was indeed the airport. And the FAA came together with the city of Fort Worth and us to put that airport project together. The relationships part of the equation is simply described. You couldn't have done it without partnerships along the way. If you look at the fact that we are in 6 cities, 3 school districts, and 2 counties, and the work that goes into creating the relationships with those jurisdictions, in order for us to be able to do what we've done, developing additional infrastructure, being able to put economic development projects together with those partners, the customers that we have today and the relationships that we have with those customers. We have spent a lot of time building a team that focuses on those relationships on an ongoing basis. So we're not just your what I would call traditional developer, where we come, buy land, build buildings, and leave. This is truly a legacy project at Alliance, and Ross Jr. views it that way. And as a result of that, we've had a great run. We've been able to, for the most part, have those very strong ties to the community, which I think has made a huge difference and enabled us to have the success that we've had.
Let's go ahead and switch over. You mentioned moving to Texas, 18 months, Joe, your daughter. And so talk about the Jordan Elizabeth Harris Foundation. Let's start, though, getting to know Joe. So talk about Jordan, talk about your daughter, talk about your family.
Well, in addition to Jordan, we also, our oldest child was Seth Jonathan Harris, and we lost Seth to SIDS when he was 3 months old. That's when we were living in Austin, and Jordan was also born in Austin. As Tom said, then we moved back up to Fort Worth, and shortly after that came Matthew, our son, who is now 30, and Alicia, our daughter, who is 28. And Matt lives in Houston currently with his wife and his 10-month-old son. And Alicia lives in Chicago, loves Chicago, and is working for Rush Hospital, which is a really large hospital in Chicago. So Jordan, all children are special. And Jordan was a special child. And she kind of lit up a room when she walked in. She had a beautiful smile. She had a beautiful, joyful personality, and pretty normal childhood sports, and just involved in a lot of things. She was also very bright. She was the valedictorian of her high school class, and she went on to get an academic scholarship at the University of Michigan, where she thrived for the first 3.5 years, and then just developed severe depression. We got a call one morning from her very close friend and roommate, who had spent the night with her at the emergency room at Michigan, where her friend had taken her after she was concerned that she might harm herself. So I went up and we talked about what had happened, and Jordan at that time felt strongly that she could finish the semester. I think this was maybe the end of November, the beginning of December. And she finished that semester, came home, went back to school at the beginning of January, and then she needed to come home, so we brought her home with us. Things just weren't working out for her. And we had never dealt with a serious mental illness in our family, so we didn't really know what it meant for somebody to be depressed. And she did an incredibly good job of hiding her depression, which we believe has a lot to do with the stigma associated with any kind of mental illness. She didn't want people to know. She didn't want to be a burden to us. So she pretty much pretended that everything was okay. In hindsight, there were signs that she was dealing with severe depression that we missed. We did everything we thought we were doing right. And one day she went to her volunteer job that she had. It was interesting because she had decided she was going to try to go back to the university. She wanted to finish her last semester. The night before she died, she was on her computer looking for therapists, because we had told her that if she was going to go back to school, we wanted her to find a therapist as soon as she got back up there. So this was the night before she died. She was looking for a therapist and had all kinds of plans to go back to school. And the next day she went to her volunteer job and she didn't come home.
Wow.
I would say too that Ellen mentioned that she was pretty special. And I think one of the reasons that made her special was she was very giving person. There were a number of causes that she thrust herself into. For example, when she died, she was volunteering for Catholic Charities. She worked for the battered women's shelter summer when she worked in Boston. She worked for a Ghana relief effort at the University of Michigan, collecting expired materials and supplies from hospitals, loaded up containers, and then went with those supplies over to Ghana and became part of a team to distribute those supplies to small villages in Ghana. So she was always wanting to do something to help others. And candidly, certainly in part, that's what drove us to do something in her name, because she was that kind of person.
And I think it's important too, when you look at this, I mean, you're talking, over a decade ago, and the stigma, especially for someone who's a high achiever, when you're talking valedictorian, always helping others, wanting to make a difference. I mean, that's a high achiever. And to your point, like, you kind of bury these things that you're going through. And even now, I mean, that's central to the core of what you're trying to do, is make these conversations that are so important, make them happen so that people do go get help and know where the resources are, and, all of these things, the information around it, but really destigmatizing these conversations to make them commonplace. And also that everyone plays a role in getting people to open up and normalizing the conversations, but also helping our loved ones, our friends, our family, our coworkers, helping them to find the help. I think, when you look at a decade ago versus where we are today, hopefully things have gotten better, but that's a big part of it, is we've got to open these points, because especially for high achievers, they're hiding it and they're going through this inner turmoil as a result, and you don't know because they're not sharing it. I would almost say it's like those who, you mentioned, your father on the veteran side serving in war. My brother's same thing, serving in war, but he doesn't talk about those. So getting them to open up almost as therapy sometimes is very difficult, but it's necessary. Back up, because for each of you, share one moment with Jordan that puts a smile on your face, like a special moment for her, just, that's special for you personally.
She was a prankster. So oldest in the family, and routinely would prank her younger brother and her younger sister. And I probably shouldn't tell this story, but I'll tell it anyway. So I think it was April Fool's Day, and she decided she was going to put saran wrap over the top of the toilet when my son decided that he needed to go to the bathroom, and all of a sudden, you can visualize what might happen.
Yeah.
And the Alicia part was, remember the Alicia part?
Oh, yeah, she went to the pet store and she bought a chocolate chip cookie, a doggy cookie. A couple of them, actually, and she handed to Alicia in a bag the cookies and told her that she bought them at the store.
Right.
And of course, Alicia ended up taking a bite out of it. Jordan went hysterical. Yeah, she was a really fun. She was incredibly fun to be around. That was why, one of the reasons I'm sure that people were so shocked to find out that she had taken her own life, because she was always joyful.
All of our kids were athletes in high school, so needless to say, as a mom and dad, we had a lot of fun watching them, play various sports throughout high school, and those are special times. And I tell the next generation, the younger people who have kids that are in grammar school, middle school, high school, enjoy those times because they are gone in a flash. So as you hang out with your son playing tennis, enjoy every bit of it. I'm sure you do.
Yeah. And I think, I look at this too, when you talk about her and always trying to make people smile and laugh and have fun and pour into them on the giving side. Comedians, musicians, you see it a lot with those who are always trying to brighten the lives of others, that they internally are facing their own darkness, but we on the outside don't see that.
Right.
I think it's really important for us, once again, to kind of have these conversations, because those who you think are pouring out the most light sometimes have the most darkness inside them that you've got to help them kind of power through. And so I think these conversations need to happen. And unfortunately, the darkness, but turning the darkness into light for others. And so talk about what you do, because it's a lot around awareness. It's a lot around, education, resources, suicide, depression. Talk about everything you do with the foundation.
Well, I just want to bring up one thing. When you were talking about how important it is to have conversations, our major fundraising event every year is a luncheon. And it is incredibly successful. First of all, the name of the luncheon is the Bring the Conversation to Light luncheon. It's been incredibly successful. The first year we had it, this was the first year we had the foundation, we had 700 people there. And since then, we've averaged around 1,000 people that attend this luncheon, 1 hour luncheon. And I believe that part of the reason for that is that this is a safe space for people to talk about a subject that is very uncomfortable to talk about, and be surrounded by people who have experienced the same sorts of things that they have. And the reason that we started, one of the reasons we started the foundation in the first place, was because as soon as we were able to really share Jordan's story, we were amazed at how many people had stories to share back with us. Like 90% of the people that we spoke with, they either lost somebody to suicide, they've been dealing with depression their whole lives. It didn't matter. They had a story to tell us. And at the time, nobody in our area in Fort Worth, Texas, was really talking about it. And like you said, things have changed and have gotten much better, but still, we have a volunteer in our organization who is, I would say, she's a 50-something-year-old African-American woman who recently lost a family member to suicide and wanted to become active with us because she felt so strongly about participating with the organization and had to ask her mother first. This is a 50-something-year-old woman. because of the stigma. There's a huge stigma in the African American and the Latino community when it comes to suicide. Huge. So yes, are we making progress? Yes, but there is still a long way to go.
So the things that we do as a foundation really are focused on education, awareness, and advocacy. We have a school program that's called Hope Squad. It's a peer support training that takes place in schools with counselors, teachers, and a representation of students. And very simply, the way it works is we train students how to recognize kids that are in trouble, and then how to refer them to the appropriate people inside the school. That metric's very important to us, and it's one that we keep very close tabs on in the schools that we actually do these trainings in. We're in 110 schools in North Texas right now. We also have adult training programs that focus on a program called QPR. QPR stands for question, persuade, and refer. Forgive me. Another 2-hour training for parents who want to understand how to handle somebody who they think might be struggling. It's not easy. It's not something that comes, you see somebody that's in trouble, it's not necessarily something that is easily, or that person's not easily approached. So we do that. We raise money for depression research. There's some very good research efforts going on at places like UT Southwestern, University of North Texas Health Science Center, and JPS, the public hospital in Fort Worth. So we really are focused on education, awareness, advocacy, and also raising money for research, depression research.
I'm thinking, when you look at the question, persuade, refer, QPR, that's obviously a really important one for the public to definitely, know and dive into deeper. Dive into that one, especially, and maybe just share some tips, in other words, when it comes to parents and being more mindful, better understanding, especially like you mentioned for students, peer-to-peer. What are some of the top tips that you like to make sure and put out there for the public?
Well, I think that's a challenging one for parents of teenagers because their behavior changes often, and maybe they're sullen often. But I think really important ones are kind of changes in sleeping habits, for example, either sleeping all the time or not sleeping enough. That was something that one of the symptoms that Jordan had was that she just wasn't sleeping. And we knew that was a problem, but we didn't see it as a serious symptom of depression, and it is. That there are, if there are changes in their behavior, if they're acting out, doing things that they otherwise would not have done in the past, if all of a sudden they're not interested in the things that they were always interested in doing before, they don't want to be around their friends. It's really just things that look odd, that look different in the behavior that they're showing is, I think, really the most important thing.
What and whether it's a teenager or an adult, I mean, the same thing goes. Look, there are varying degrees of depression. There's no question about that. And I think the most important advice we can give people is to try to start the conversation, have the conversation, and also at the same time find that individual help and encourage that individual to get help either from a therapist or a psychiatrist, psychologist, whatever. And sometimes help could mean having their best friend talk to them or their brother or sister talk to them. But the important thing is to try to get them to open up and talk about it.
I think being a noticer, paying attention, being mindful of that, and also acting on that and having those conversations and taking it serious when you're doing it. I think in some cases you can disregard it and, it's okay. You want to snap your fingers and think it's going to get better when in fact they really do need help. So I think being the noticer, but also taking it serious is very important. And I'm thinking, sadly in the media world, to your point, when you talk about normalizing it, you interview so many people and they have lost loved ones. And I'm even thinking there was one in particular where the son had reached out to a friend of his and he didn't know that the very next day, or actually later that day, he was thinking about committing suicide. But he called and he checked in because he noticed something was off. So he took it upon himself to check in, make sure he was okay, invite him out to go do something together because he didn't want him to be alone. He just knew something was off. And so I think, and the friend credits that with saving his life. And I think being a noticer, being intentional, taking it serious, acting on it, those are things that really are important in the scheme of things. And you might not never know the impact you're having on somebody else, but just paying attention to them and asking them. And then, like you said, knowing how to refer them to get help to the experts, you literally could be saving lives, including your own son or daughters.
Right.
One of the things that we're really proud about with regards to the Hope Squad program is in last year, the school year of 2021, we had almost 700 kids referred for help. And that's 700 kids that otherwise might have fallen through the cracks. So it's really important just to be observant, especially like I said, if you're noticing that things are different. Another one is if they start to give things like prized possessions away to people, that's also a sign.
Yeah. Well, and I tell you too, with the pandemic and everything that's gone on over the last 2.5, 3 years, this roller coaster ride, how that plays a really important role in depression and suicide and all these things that we're talking about. It just makes it that much more magnified in terms of what you're doing. You have a number of opportunities to plug in, one of which goes literally from the Canadian border all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And so talk about this ride and some of the ways that we as a community can plug into your efforts.
Well, I mentioned before we started today that we actually did a ride in 2017 that was from Fort Clatsop, Oregon to St. Louis to DC, the Lewis and Clark Trail backwards. And I candidly, at the end of that ride, I told my buddy who I did it with, don't ever ask me to do something like that again. But here we are again, it's 2022. And we're going to ride from the Canadian border, following the Mississippi all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. We have
on bicycles.
On bicycles, yes, not on motorcycles. We have what looks like 24 riders that will do all or part of that ride. And really, the purpose of this ride is to reach out to communities outside of Dallas-Fort Worth, and again, start the conversation or encourage people to have the conversation with us along the way, share their stories, and certainly have us share our stories. There wasn't a person or community that we didn't ride into in 2017 where we were talking to people and didn't get a story back about some loved one, some friend who was either struggling or who had taken their life by suicide. So what we hope to do is meet with people along the way. We've got some meetings that are already set up in the communities that we're going to be in. The website is lightthetrailride.org. You can get on the website and you can support riders. You can make donations. There's an opportunity to ride in specific segments. So segments from Minneapolis to St. Louis, another segment from St. Louis to Memphis, and then the last segment from Memphis to New Orleans. If you'd like to ride with us.
You want to tell them a little bit about what the ride entails, just so people would know,
well, it's 1,800 miles plus. We're trying to do it with teams of 4. So unlike the first ride where a couple of us did the whole thing, which was 3,450 miles, this ride is a team of 4. So if you're on my team, you ride the first 50 miles in a day, I ride the second 50, and the third rider rides the third 50. So we cover 150 miles a day, and we'll do that over a 2-week period. So you need to be a fairly stout cyclists to do this, but if there's a team of 4 that would like to join us out there, we'd happy to be able to talk to them. Or you can simply get on our website and support riders and or make donations on our behalf. And all of that, the fundraising that we do along the way will be used to support our programs in North Texas right now. We're in 110 schools today, and we'd love to see that number grow beyond that. We've got a great team of folks that are full-time employees that work for the foundation now that help us do that. So that's really what we intend to do here, hopefully the first 2 weeks of October.
We'll also have a virtual option for people who can't get out and actually ride on their cycles with us. We're still working on the logistics for that, but that's another opportunity if you don't see yourself being able to do 50 miles a day, 3 days in a row, which is a lot. Then you'll have a virtual option too, which will also be on the website.
Absolutely. Well, the good news is, as we mentioned before we hit record on this, we do know a lot of cyclists and a lot of riders. And so I think that, we can get some people out for sure. And to your point, I mean, it all supports a powerful cause. And so when you look at getting out and obviously doing the ride, there's a much higher purpose for the ride in terms of what you're doing and elevating awareness, because at each stop in the way, getting the media out, getting people out, having those conversations with families, I think is so important as a part of this process to just continue to build that conversation, to continue to push in all these different directions, and to normalize these conversations. Give us one more thing when you look at, especially over the next few years, some of your major goals. I mean, you mentioned obviously getting it in more schools. So what are some of your major goals over the next few years?
If I can backtrack for 1 second, I think another thing that we'd like to have available for people as we're going along this ride is the ability to start an organization like this where they live. We'd be thrilled to let people in on how we started and how they could do the same thing just to expand it. We don't see ourselves expanding more than the state of Texas for sure. There is plenty of opportunity for us in that huge state. And there are other organizations that do similar things to us too. So we also don't want to encroach on what they're doing as well. But lots of rural communities not far from where we are that could really use some resources. I'd love to be able to expand. We'd love to be able to expand into some of the rural communities and do more of the trainings, get more volunteers out, because we have a limited bandwidth with the people that are employed, but we also have lots of people who are interested in volunteering too. So getting more people trained to offer, like train the trainer, so we can offer these programs where they live and meet them where they live instead of just offering them in our kind of little general vicinity. So.
And Jeremy, I've always been intrigued and surprised about the void that was in our community and the void that we filled with the things that we do in the schools and with adults. There wasn't another organization like ours that did those kinds of things, nor is there today, at least on the west side, I would say on the west side of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. But I think this thing can get as big as we let it. I think we envision the numbers of schools that we're in to grow dramatically here. I will say this about the dialogue related to mental health, that it is truly different than it was 10 years ago. And that's a good thing. I think the media has picked up on it and helped in that regard. I think people are understanding that in today's world, both adult and children need perhaps more help than they did in the past. And the culture related to that, I think overall is truly changing. Long way to go, but I think we're getting better.
I agree. And I look at it too in the sense that you're having well-known musicians and actors come out saying, I'm going to get treatment whether it's drug and alcohol, depression, whatever it is, but normalizing that, seeing these people that you look up to saying, no, I need help, I'm going to get help. All of these things really do help to normalize and, move the needle in the right direction for these sort of conversations. And I agree 100% in the sense that what you're doing is relationship driven. It's people helping people noticing people that are going through pain. You got to be focused on each other to be able to do that. And so while there is tremendous need, being able to say, no, we want to collaborate, we want to work together, we want to obviously do our part with what we can control, but we want to be able to share and give and all work together for this common higher purpose, especially realizing that in schools, high schools, colleges, where depression and suicide are peak, especially among high performers and achievers, there is a lot of importance around what you do. And in the rural communities, which, as you mentioned, in many cases are under-resourced. And so there is tremendous potential for you to change the narrative, but ultimately save lives as a part of what you're doing that I think really is powerful. Right. How has all this changed the way you look at your own family? I mean, especially when you look at your children and each other and what you've gone through and the difference you're making, how has it changed your perspective on what family means?
That's a great question. Well, look, when you're thrust into something like this because of tragedy, your life is going to change one way or another. And, after 6 months or so passed when we lost Jordan, a very good friend of ours, and the gentleman that actually rode across the country, a guy named Isaac Manning, came up and said, was with the idea of putting together this philanthropic effort in her name. The things that I believe in, the things that are important to me, and I'm sure Ellen feels the same way, are so much different after you lose children than they were before. And I think, life is tough. And everybody has their crosses to bear, and some are larger than others. But our way of handling our loss was to try to help other people. That doesn't mean that everybody should do that. It just means that it was good for us. It helped us, I think, stay together as a married couple. We were able to support each other by doing this. And we're very fortunate people to have been able to do what we did.
Yeah, I have one really important thing to say in my mind is important. Both Matt and Alicia were at the University of Texas in Austin at the time that Jordan died. And as soon as they went back to school, we got them in therapy. And I believe, number one, because of the amazing therapist that they had, but number two, that they actually went to therapy right away, had a huge impact on how they were able to cope with the loss of their sister, who they idolized and adored. So I think that therapy is an amazing tool that anybody who has the ability to take advantage of it should take advantage of.
Yeah. I'm glad you added that. I agree 100%. Absolutely. So wrap up, we'll do a lightning round, which will just be some fun. Like, where do you enjoy eating, especially, in general in Texas and when you're on vacation and stuff, but we'll call that the lightning round. But wrap up with words of encouragement, because obviously, as you mentioned, it's dramatically different 10 years, in terms of where we are today. When you look at the road ahead, give us some words of encouragement for what puts a smile on your face with where we're headed with all of this.
I think that when we walk into a school or when we meet with adults at the adult education efforts that we have, I mentioned earlier the story we get back. I think people are much more open today about having these types of programs in front of them, whether it be in school or for adults. I'm encouraged because of what I mentioned earlier with the media highlighting mental health and the importance of people's mental health much more than they did 10 years ago. So I'm optimistic. I look, teachers and administrators have a lot of choices for programs that they have in schools. Hope Squad is one of a couple hundred programs that are available to people out there. The important thing is that our kids have something that they can latch onto when they're in school. And it doesn't have to be the Hope Squad. It can be whatever other program that they want to look at. I'm optimistic. The numbers are still high. COVID didn't help. The isolation related to COVID didn't help. But I think if we can get people back to work, which, depending on who you talk to, that's a good thing or not such a good thing. But we can get people to interact with people more, get out of the house, and try to defeat that isolation that came with COVID. I think we'll be okay.
I'm really encouraged by young people, because I think young people are so much more willing to open up about their mental health challenges than we as adults ever were. So I'm also encouraged too about how different, and things really are so much different than they were when Jordan died. I can remember when she first got sick and we were taking her to see a therapist, and we got advice from a very trusted source of ours who recommended to us that we not put it on her insurance, on our insurance, because a potential employer down the road might find out that she was in therapy, and perhaps that would keep them from hiring her or give them the wrong impression about her as a person. That sort of thing I think is still around, but a lot less than it was 10 years ago. So I really am encouraged that there are just so many more people who are willing to share what they're going through and encourage other people to get help. That's the most important thing, is just getting the help.
I would add to say what Ellen just said. I think corporate America has really picked up on that point, where now with most benefit packages for employees of Fortune 500 companies, they include coverage for mental health services, and I think that's just fantastic. And we've got to do more of those things. I worry about those people who don't have great insurance, but even with that, a place like Fort Worth with MHMR in Fort Worth, they have tremendous resources that are available. It's getting the people connected to those resources is part of our challenge. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's switch over and do a lightning round. So we'll just do a few short questions, short answers, just having some fun. When you have visitors to Texas, what are some places you like to take them to?
Well, certainly the Stockyards in Fort Worth. That's an incredibly popular place, as well as Sundance Square. And I think Fort Worth has some of the best museums in the state of Texas too. So those would be my choices.
Great steaks, places to get great steaks downtown for sure. This little community up on the north side called Roanoke is kind of a go-to foodie town, if you will. Babe's Chicken is there, and a place called Classic Cafe has been there for 25 plus years, run by a couple of brothers who do a fantastic job. So,
where's a favorite vacation spot for your family outside of where you are right now? What's another favorite vacation spot?
We had some incredible family vacations in Colorado with a little pop-up camper that we had when the kids were little. Colorado is just the most beautiful state, no matter what time of year, really. So I think Colorado, and then we also went to the Northwest as well. Oregon and Washington, beautiful.
What's a favorite tradition? It could be around the holidays or just an everyday tradition. What's a favorite family tradition?
We have a cousins party in Maine. My mom was one of 9, grew up in Portland, Maine. We have 32 first cousins on my side of the family. I don't know how many second and third cousins there are. Many of them are up here. So we generally about every other year have a cousins reunion in Maine.
But it used to be every year,
Yeah,
remember? When the kids were younger.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Yeah, there's
lot of
no
fun.
place like Maine in the summer, that's for sure. But don't anybody else come.
You don't want too many people to enjoy it. Still keep it top secret.
Yeah.
So putting on your Boston hat, what's a spot for our next trip to go to Boston? What's something that we have to go and see and do?
Oh, well, the Freedom Trail, I took, my daughter Alicia and I took a trip to the Freedom Trail when she was studying AP US history. It was unbelievably moving for her to see all of these places that she was studying about, that she could actually feel like this is history here. But there's so many things to see in Boston. It really is just such a fascinating city. And then you could take a little side trip down to Cape Cod too, which is a beautiful place also.
Two things: Italian food on the north side. You got to go. There's a lot of choices there for restaurants. And then the Museum of Fine Arts, just tremendous history in there from all over the world. My sister happens to be a docent there. And if you're really nice to us, maybe we can hook you up with a tour.
Very cool. And then what is a quote that inspires you? You don't have to get it verbatim, but what's a quote that inspires you?
Oh my gosh.
I have a rock engraved on my desk at home that simply says, never, never quit.
Yeah, I'll go with that one.
I'll go with that one. You know, well, it ties into everything that we've talked about, but many, many years from now, what do you hope your legacy is for you individually, but obviously most importantly for the foundation and the work and your impact? So what do you hope the legacy is for the work that you're doing with the foundation?
Well, my hope is that it continues even after we're gone. That's because I don't see, what part of our mission statement for a long time was eradicate suicide. That is kind of pie in the sky goal, but yeah, very aspirational. But wouldn't that be an amazing thing to get everybody who's dealing with some form of mental illness into help? That, in my mind, that would be incredible.
Well, our legacy is not important. The legacy of the foundation certainly is, and I would agree with Ellen that we hope that it's here for a very long time, that it can continue to grow and have a very positive effect in not only our community but other communities around the country. The Hope Squad program was actually started by a superintendent in Provo, Utah, a guy named Dr. Greg Hudnall, and fantastic guy. It's in 1,400 schools around the country right now. And we'd love to see those numbers grow. And we want to be a part of that. So.
Well, and that's where speaking it into existence. It's amazing when you start talking about it, good things happen. So you mentioned the website for the Light the Trail ride, but go ahead and talk about both the website for the Jordan Elizabeth Harris Foundation and the Light the Trail ride. Where do we go to carry these conversations forward, to learn more and to get involved?
The foundation website is jordanharrisfoundation.org. And there are links there to the Light the Trail website and to all of our events that we've got going on, as well as resources. Not all the resources we have on there are local, there are national ones too. And I think it's also really important to mention how wonderful it is with the new 988 telephone number for people who are in crisis, who don't have to try to remember that 800-273 suicide prevention lifeline. So just to promote 988 wherever you can, so people understand that there's an easy option for them.
On the Light the Trail ride website, you'll see a menu item called Ride 4, RIDE 4. And we did this on the last ride, and we at the beginning of the ride every morning, we read all the ride fours that came into us on our website. And the ride four simply is, okay, I'm Tom Harris and I live in Fort Worth, Texas, and I want to support the ride, but I want to share my story. And the ride four is 2 or 3 sentences on what your story is. And we'll take those ride fours and we'll read them every morning as they come in. And it's a simple way for people to support the ride and at the same time remember someone that they may have either lost or someone who they know that might be struggling.
Yeah.
And we would dedicate that day's ride to whoever it was. And we promoted that on the Light the Trail website and got all kinds of names and pictures of people. We had no idea who they were, but we dedicated each day's ride to one of those people. And it was incredibly moving for us to do that. And I know it was really important. The one thing I think, especially when you lose a child, is you don't want that child forgotten ever. And for us to be able to honor these people who have been lost, I think was a really important thing for us as well as them.
Absolutely. Websites again, jordanharrisfoundation.org, lightthetrailride.org as well. So Tom, Ellen Harris, thank you for being change makers. Thank you for all you do. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
You bet. Take care.
It
Bye-bye.
was wonderful, Jeremy. Thank you so much.